Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are so excited to be back for Season 5. We are kicking it off today, of course, with Because You Left.
And we've got the first part of what will be a multi-part interview with Damon Lindelof, creator of Lost, making his second appearance on The Hatch, so we're very, very excited to share that with you.
Yeah, virtually needs no introduction, so let's jump right in.
Welcome back, everybody, to Season 5 of The Hatch. We know it's been a little while. We've been pulling together some good interviews, and we're very, very excited to be doing this with you again.
That's true. We did try to make the premiere date a number of significance, but we wanted to get it out to you sooner rather than later, so we appreciate your forgiveness in advance.
Yes, you'll have to deal with 5-6, even though that's not lost significant in any way. Anyway, for those of you listening to The Hatch for the first time, we start every episode with our hot takes, where Rosie and I each share our hottest take about that week's episode, and we'll also share a hot take from a listener if we have one. We've got one this week, and if you want to share your own about a future episode, call and leave us a message. The number is 9546-DHARMA. Again, call and leave us your hot take about that week's episode at 9546-DHARMA. Rosie, what is your hot take about Because You Left?
So in as is tradition, my hot take is something that I loved, which in Because You Left is the opening sequence. I love that we are back to what we did in seasons 2 and 3, where the opening shots of the episode drop you into somewhere you've never been. Initially, you see this old-timey clock that, clicks over to 8:15. Ha ha ha, how nice. You see a record. For a second, I was like, oh, are we in the Hatch? There's a woman in bed who we don't know. We're following someone around who we don't recognize. And then, of course, it's revealed to be Francois Chow, who we know as Pierre Chang, and in this case is named as Dr. Marvin Candle. And it's this fantastic sequence. I'm so glad we are back to doing this drop the viewer in, like, in media res thing, because I think one of our kind of complaints, as it were, about the season 4 premiere was that it didn't do that. It just sort of continued the story from the finale, which, of course, this episode does in spades, and we'll get into that. But it does this marvelous thing where it's repeating this format that's been used in previous episodes, but always with characters we don't know. And in this case, you get this great moment of realization in the middle where you're like, oh shit, that's Pierre Chang, and he's recording one of these videos. Oh my god, we're in the 1970s.
And we're here with him in person, not on a screen. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. And then, of course, you're in the cave, and then Daniel Faraday shows up, and we'll get into that. I also think that's great, but we'll get into that in more detail.
No, I mean, it was such a bold storytelling choice. I mean, because, the season 2 premiere with Desmond, I mean, it dropped you in out of nowhere, but it also was like, what it was doing is it was picking up where season 1 left off, because you didn't know that at the time. It, builds up to the moment of Jack and Locke blowing the hatch open. And season 3, I mean, it's not quite the same, because it takes you back, back a little bit in time to when the plane crashes, but it's still a story that then, quickly gets told. You're starting with Juliet, in that first episode, and then New Otherton and whatnot. But in this case, they're flashing forward here and showing us basically something right out of, like, the ending of this season. Mm-hmm. I mean, Faraday doesn't come back to the island until the variable, 14 episodes in, which is when we see that sequence again and see Faraday's end of it. Like, they thought out and they said, okay, we're going to be here at the end of the season. Let's drop in and randomly start with this scene that we're then not going to explain for, like, episodes and episodes. I mean, they're not even going to end up in Dharma time until, like, episode 8, LaFleur. Right. So it's just, I just find it to be such a fascinating and wonderful storytelling choice to then, do the mindfuck with this and then make us wait so long to figure out what was actually happening.
But at the same time, the introduction of Faraday immediately plants not just the seeds of the notion of time travel, but it sort of hits you over the head with, like, hey, we're doing time travel.
It does.
In the cave, the Dharma workers are talking about.
And that energy, once we can harness it correctly, it's going to allow us to manipulate time.
Okay, so what? We're gonna go back and kill Hitler?
Don't be absurd. There are rules. Rules that can't be broken.
And then the shot cuts to somebody on the ground with a nosebleed, which is something that we as viewers have seen before. And then Faraday walks in.
Where did we see nosebleeds before?
In The Constant.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, just a quick thing here. So Lostpedia actually has two notes that are of interest to this conversation. One is there was a bit of audio commentary on this episode by Damon and Carlton on the DVDs, where apparently they say that the scene where Daniel explains the island skipping like a record, which, by the way, is a great simplified explanation of what's going on after he tells Sawyer that Sawyer's way too dumb to understand what's happening. He does a great job of explaining that.
A couple seconds of a shot of a record skipping in the opening sequence.
Which is another reason why it's great.
Just pretty little tie.
Yes, but apparently, so they say that scene was reshot and added earlier in the episode at a later date because the producers felt that viewers would be less confused when given an explanation earlier in the episode. So that was definitely something on their minds here of trying to make sure that we weren't too, jarred out of place by the time travel aspect, or at least too surprised what was happening. The other note that's of interest, according to Dark UFO, the opening scene of Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham was originally intended to be the opening scene of this episode. So that's something with Alana and Caesar on the beach at the island, apparently, after 316 comes down. So anyway, what Dark UFO says is that was supposed to be the opening scene of this episode, and supposedly, according to Dark UFO, the new scene with Pierre and Faraday was added later, after it was decided to use the scene following the crash of Ajira 316 in Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham instead. So interesting, They would have started on the island after 316 comes down as the preview. I think this is a way better place to start.
Interesting. I think this sets up a lot more mystery.
Yeah, totally.
And it bookends the end of the season so nicely, whereas, Alana and Caesar are characters who never really fully get fleshed out, I don't think.
Yeah, it doesn't really end up going anywhere. One last thing about your hot take. I love watching it and knowing that the baby is Miles. Yeah. And also, knowing that we have that great conversation between Pierre and Miles later where Hurley's trying to get them to bond, and he's, they're asking about his favorite music, and he says, I like country, and Miles is turned off. So he's playing a Willie Nelson album here. So I feel like for that reason, the Miles stuff in the country, the scene is somehow even better in hindsight than it was the first time because you can appreciate that aspect of it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sorry.
All this is to say, Sammy, what is your hot take?
Okay. Well, I'll make my hot take quick. I love season 5. It's my favorite season of Lost. I'm so excited to discuss it. I think
there's a
way they structure. There's a butt coming. Yeah, let me get there. I think the way they structure the time travel element and put the pieces together is just really, really elegant and smart and well done. And we're going to talk with Damon all about that when we get to that conversation. However, I'm gonna give here I think what's going to be my one complaint this year with the time travel logistics of one thing that just doesn't make any sense. The scene where Faraday tells Desmond, "You've got to go, find my mother," and Desmond then, miraculously or magically wakes up at the exact right moment, 3 years later, off the island, or 3 years after he left the island, just when his friends are trying to go back, and remembers this critical piece of information from years earlier. I get it. Faraday makes a speech about how Desmond is uniquely and miraculously special, and this wouldn't work with anyone else. But it still doesn't really make any sense. If this is something that always happened, it's just so convenient that we then see it happening at the exact right moment later on, that he suddenly remembers this when it was, in his head the whole time. It just doesn't, it's the one time I think that they didn't come up with the most elegant solution to solve a plot problem.
I think that's fair. I did get the sense that because Desmond is special in whatever way he is special, that it wasn't so much like a memory in a dream as it was his consciousness was literally back on the island in that moment. And then,
but it's not like that. But that memory that always happened at that
Right.
point in time. That wasn't a new event that occurred just because we saw it in this episode. That always happened in like 2002 or 2003 or whatever
Right.
year it was in Desmond's life. Just saying.
Yeah, I'm sure.
My one complaint. We have a listener hot take too.
Let's play it from Anthony.
Hi, this is Anthony from Virginia Beach. I have a hot take about the episode Because You Left. In this episode, there is a moment where John Locke is in the jungle, and Ethan comes out of the jungle, and it is one of those shocking Ethan moments that Damon and William Maypother have talked to you about, of the shock of seeing Ethan show up in an unexpected place. And I've got to say, I am over it. I don't think the Ethan Rom shock factor is there anymore in season 5 of the show. I think it would be more fun to have Tom Friendly come out of the jungle, or Miss Clue, or even Isabel. And I think having Ethan is just a little bit boring.
I gotta be honest, Anthony. I was drinking a cup of water when I listened to your hot take, and I almost did a spit take in the middle of it because this is spicy, and I really, really respect it. I don't know that I agree. I actually looked this up, and Ethan does not appear at all in season 4. It's been a little while since we saw Ethan, and he appears in the daytime. He's wearing like a polo shirt. I don't know that it's supposed to be scary the way it has been the previous times Ethan has appeared as a threat. I think it's more just like, that's Ethan. I remember him. This is a joke we're doing now. What do you think?
I agree with that. I think your read is right. I disagree with Anthony's hot take, but I respect the hell out of it. Anthony goes for it with this hot take. And for those who maybe haven't been listening to the Hatch the whole way through, we had a conversation back in season 1 with William Maypother, who plays Ethan, and he was very excited telling us how it got to the point where he'd be reading a script and suddenly the line would be, "Holy fucking shit, it's Ethan Rom." That's how the writers would introduce him back into the script. So that's a line that just pops into my head all the time still, honestly.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, and if you want to be like Anthony, again, give us a call, leave us a voice message, preferably 60 seconds or less. 9546 Dharma is the number.
All right, well, let's get into it. We've already obviously talked extensively about the opening sequence and about Faraday. So, yeah, I don't want to belabor too much the things that do happen on the island. One thing I want to bring up is that I think Juliet is a very early candidate for MVP of this season.
Oh, that's bold.
I mean,
Do tell.
She is negotiating so many competing interests among the party left on the island, and she does it flawlessly. She's getting Sawyer to chill the fuck out and stop punching people. She's sort of galvanizing the group to say, let's go back to the beach, let's stay safe, let's make sure that we're in a place where we can figure out what we need to know. She listens to Faraday and appears to, process the information as well as anyone possibly could, given what the information is.
Right, unlike Sawyer, who's obviously in a bad place emotionally, but also randomly demands that Faraday give him his shirt. Yeah, no, I agree. You're right, Juliet handles things quite a bit better.
Yeah.
I would say that if I had to make an early MVP nomination, which I wasn't planning to do, but since you went there, I'm going to say Faraday. I mean, just because, he knows what's going on. He's got his little his notebook with all of the answers in it, and also just like, I just love watching Jeremy Davies basically no matter what he does on screen.
Yeah, he's tremendous.
I think this might have been my favorite line of the episode when Sawyer asks him,
So when are we now, WizKid? We're either in the past or we're in the future.
and he just does that incredible pause in the middle where it's like, there's only one thing he could be about to say, but he's still he's really emphasizing it or thinking about it or something. I started laughing before the second half of the sentence because the pause was just so good.
Yeah, and he does a really good job of explaining this to the layperson, right? I mean, we're moving along a street, the record is skipping, he's ready to explain what's happening, despite how complex it is, and despite straight up telling Sawyer, like, you could never understand this.
Yeah.
And then I believe getting punched as a result. You know, and I understand, you know, the role he's playing there is explaining it to me, the viewer, but yeah, I think he does a good job of negotiating that. The only other thing happening on the island really is John
and Richard. It's kind of remarkable to watch these scenes and to think about the fact that this is all the Man in Black's manipulation that's happening right here. I mean, the first time, you know, you watch these scenes at the beginning of this season, you think, wow, this is, you know, Richard is all-knowing and he knew that Locke was going to be there, and this has to do with his immortality and special knowledge, and he's giving him a compass, and ooh. Mm-hmm. And then later in the season, we're just going to see, nope, you know, it's reincarnated, you know, Locke, a.k.a. the Man in Black, telling Richard to go out there and give him a compass and tell him what he's got to do in order to, you know, fulfill the Man in Black's own plot.
Right.
I mean, and it's just like, frankly, if you start to think about the time loops too hard, I couldn't quite work it out, and I didn't really figure out how to do it. But I mean, so, when you think about it, what this scene really tells us in hindsight is that, I mean, everything that's going on here, the idea that he has to bring them all back in order to fix what went wrong as communicated to him by Richard, that's the Man in Black's plot, to bring the candidates back so he can kill them. I mean, that's like all it is.
Yeah.
And this has been going on since, you know, since season, you know, 3, we saw Jack's flash forward at the end, since Christian in the cabin last year telling him to move the island. Like, this is all a grand scheme, and there's all this mystery and mysticism surrounding it. About, oh, we have to bring them back and it's fate and they're supposed to be here. And maybe they are supposed to come back for another reason, but in terms of why they do and what actually happens, you know, Locke got duped, and we're seeing it right here.
Yeah. Well, and Richard got a little bit duped too.
Yes, he did. Richard didn't know who he was taking orders from. For all he knew, it was John Locke, resurrected and right. As a god, basically. And it's not unreasonable that Locke would fall for it either.
No.
The guy's really good at what he does.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that kind of takes the magic out of it a little bit, but.
Well, I mean, but, you know, at the same time, it's like, there are other reasons for them to be there, because being on the island enables them to resolve their own internal problems and all of this other stuff. I mean, I think the island, you know, we will ultimately get to a place of, yes, it's had a magical quality and a positive impact on these people's lives, but just in terms of the Oceanic Six, we have to go back. It's not what it appears to be for a very long time. It's just not. I will say that my second favorite line of dialogue in the episode, after we're either in the past or the future, is when Richard says to John,
next time we see each other, I'm not going to recognize you. All right?
You give me this.
All right.
What is it?
It's a compass.
What does it do?
It points north, John.
It's very, very good.
All right. Well, then let's go off the island.
Okay, let's do it.
So a lot happens here. We get to meet each of the Oceanic Six and see where they're at, and how they are responding to what's happening. Of course, Sayid and Hurley are together. Jack is with Ben in the funeral parlor. Kate is taking Aaron and fleeing because she's been subject to a DNA test. Hurley and Sayid end up in this, like, wild, like, fight sequence.
I thought that was an epic fight scene.
We're 25 minutes into the season, and Sayid is, like, throwing people over balconies. I mean, what more do you want?
Throwing them over balconies and impaling them on clean dishes.
Yeah. But I think the most intriguing of what we see here is Sun's confrontation with Charles Widmore.
Yeah.
Widmore shows up as this, like, very classic movie villain, and the reason he's angry with Sun is that she showed him no respect.
It's such a good description. Classic movie villain. You're so right.
And just the accent. I mean, he looks and sounds and feels like a villain. And then, of course, Sun says, well, our common interest here is to kill Ben Linus. And then we have already seen Ben, and we know that he's interacting with the Oceanic Six. We know Sayid's been working with him. And I think it creates this, like, nice political intrigue plotline that I'm excited to get into.
I am as well. And by the way, Widmore was able to control airport security, like in the post 9/11 era. Like, what's up with that? That's surprising.
Yeah.
That man can do what he pleases.
Yeah, and I mean that is another classic movie villain trope, isn't it? That he has enough money that he controls the world.
Yeah. Another episode that both Widmore and Penny appeared in where they did not interact.
Oh, yeah.
Remember when Sonia Walger told us that she pointed out that she and her father never had any scenes together on the show?
That's right.
It's wild. Here we go again.
Good point. Gosh, what stood out to you off island?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, you mentioned, I guess I do have one more complaint. You mentioned the thing with the lawyer coming to take the DNA sample of Kate. That character, Dan Norton, who turns out to be working for Ben, I feel like that's another example of just like kind of a dumb plot machination. Like they needed to get her worried in a hurry about losing Erin to get her on the path to going back to the island. I don't know. I mean, I guess it made sense that Ben did that. I just felt like it was a little bit of a little bit forced, and it just happened very fast. So, whatever. Yeah. The other thing in that Jack Ben funeral parlor scene that stood out to me was when Jack asks, why is this all happening? And Ben says, it's because you left, Jack. It's like, already, it's like, okay, Ben, we know now, he has no idea what he's talking about. Like, he really, really has no idea what he's talking about. This is classic Ben making shit up to serve his own ends because he wants to go back to the island.
Well, and he's a world-class bullshitter. I mean, it comes off as so sinister. He comes off as so confident. And clearly he's made that impression on others, too. Because in one of the exchanges between Saeed and Hurley, Saeed reveals that he was working for Ben, and then he says to Hurley, whatever he tells you, do the opposite.
Yes.
Which perhaps would be good advice for Jack in this scenario as well.
Honestly, very similar to the Man in Black in that way. So it's interesting that that's ultimately the one character in the end who's able to manipulate him, as we'll see later this year. The one manipulator who's greater than Ben.
Yeah, because it is... He is treating Jack as a pawn and saying, like, okay, you're the person who needs to rally the troops here.
Yeah.
Not unlike
and
what
I think
the Man in Black does.
No, not at all. And I think what Ben wants is he thinks that unless he gets them together, he's not going to be able to go back to the island. I mean, I think he sees the Oceanic Six as his ticket out of banishment.
Right.
And ultimately, he's right. It works out for him.
Works out is questionable, but he does end up back on the island, yes.
Yeah. Ben is happy in the end, I think.
He's on a journey. He's close to peace. He's approaching peace by the end of season 6, I think. See, it feels like we ought to do hindsights.
I actually have another complaint. Apparently I had several. I love this episode, I should say. Like, I've complained a couple times. I'm going to do one more complaint. But this is an excellent season premiere that sets up, like, the fact that they've got to deal both with the Oceanic Six running around in 6 different directions off the island, and also our on-island characters flashing through time, who knows where. Like, they strike the balance really, really nicely. It's a fun episode to watch. I think it's a great premiere.
Yeah, it is. And when they were flashing through time, do you remember when we talked to Rebecca Mader in season 4? And she was talking about shooting all those flashes.
I know.
And she was like, oh, we'd all have to sort of grab our heads and do like, whoa. And the actors would say to each other, like, oh, I did that. You can't do that with your hands. Like, that's what I did. And it's funny to watch those knowing that.
It is. Everyone should go back and listen to our conversation with Rebecca from the first couple episodes of season 4. She was so much fun. The thing I was going to additionally complain about, I mean, we talked in that conversation with her about how kind of frustrating and disappointing it was both for her and for us as viewers that her, whole season 5 storyline leading up to her quick death is just like, the her and Faraday romantic connection thing, which is just not a satisfying storyline for her or for anybody. And you see it here. I mean, she's like randomly flirting with Daniel, as they get back to don't dilly-dally, Dan. It's just so out of place. Yeah,
and when she gets a nosebleed and, he sort of calls attention to it and she says, oh, I haven't had a nosebleed since I was little. Ugh, we know where this is going.
It's almost like, it's like her storyline is just suddenly only about Daniel here. And that's just, no fault of Jeremy Davies. It's just a little disappointing.
Yeah. Should we do hindsights? It feels weird to end the conversation without a note.
Yeah, what the hell? Let's do it. I think I used all my hindsights up.
Oh, I actually have one.
You do? So just to explain this to our listeners here who don't know what we're talking about, we've traditionally ended the last few years with a hindsight segment where we say something that felt different about watching the episode in hindsight. And we talked ahead of this, recording this, about not doing it this year because we just always would use up all of our hindsights during the regular conversation. However, Rosie says she has one. I don't know if I do anymore. I think I blew all my hindsights, but go for it.
I do have one.
Okay.
Which is one of the things we see briefly on the island is Rose and Bernard. I think it's right after the first flash. They sort of get separated. Like Bernard's on the beach and Rose comes running out of the woods and they reunite. And I believe that's the last time we see them until the finale of this season. But in the finale, there's a moment where I think it's after Jack and company get back to the island. They run into Bernard and Rose, who come out of the jungle, and they're like, oh, come on. Like, you guys are back. We were at peace, and we were living so happily.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a really, like, nice... I mean, they're really short scenes. They're, like, probably less than a minute each, but I like Rose and Bernard, and I want them to be happy, and I'm glad they find happiness on the island. That's all.
Me too. I think that's one of that's the happiest ending on the show, honestly, for those characters.
Yeah.
And, I'm looking it up, and you are, well, almost right. They apparently, Rose and probably Bernard also were briefly in next week's episode, and then they don't return until the incident part 1.
Huh.
I think I used up all my hindsights in conversation, and I'm out.
That's what I always do. Except today.
I know what it feels like to be Rosie.
Well, I'm so excited to talk about the rest of season 5. But before we go any further, I guess we should pass it off to our interview with Damon Lindelof, who of course is one of the creators of Lost. As Sammy said earlier, we will be airing this interview in several parts because it was a pretty lengthy conversation, including we got into really some nitty-gritty details about the incident, and so we're going to save part of this conversation for the season finale. But this week we're going to talk about Season 5, broadly conceived, time travel, a lot of great stuff. Let's get right in.
We are very excited to be here on The Hatch with Damon Lindelof. I don't think he needs that much of an introduction. He was one of the creators of Lost. Damon, thank you very much for being back with us on The Hatch.
Is it on The Hatch or in The Hatch? It's got to, I guess, a little bit of both, right? It's an honor either way.
We're fine either way. If you want to say in the hatch, we'll live with that.
I feel like we've been collectively in the hatch for about a year now. So
True.
So
doing this interview nearly the 1 year anniversary here.
Nice to see you guys.
So we're talking about season 5. A lot has been said, I think, over time about how Lost sort of changed from the beginning to the end, just in terms of the tone and the tenor of the show from season 1 to seasons 5 and 6. I'm curious. Season 5 is really where you start to I want to use the expression "go off the rails," but I don't mean that in a bad way. But where you get into time travel and Miss Hawking and all of this wild stuff. What was it like for you and your your writer's room going into that season? Knowing that you were going to be really going out there in this particular year. Is it something? Were you excited about it? Were you nervous about it? Like, just how did you feel? At this point in the show about where things were going.
I mean, the first thing that I'll say is, and it's really important to say this, is that my memory is more in the memoir camp than the literal, this is the way that it actually happened. You're talking to one person, and a lot of the feelings and experiences that I had over the course of the close to 7 years that I was making the show kind of bleed into one another, particularly in the there's a clear demarcation point in the middle of season 3, which was basically there was a time that we were writing the show where we thought they were never going to let us end it, and then there was a time after that, and the memories around that time are very specific. And then I remember a fair amount about season 4 because there was a writer's strike, and and we had to sort of collapse a fair amount of our storytelling into less episodes. And I remember really liking that, like sort of feeling like I'd always felt like the best version of Lost would have been about 13 episodes a season. And season 4 is about as close as we came to that. But I do remember coming into season 5, we had a lot of the end game sort of figured out, and as we were designing season 4, when you do flash forwards, you have to say like, all right, well, how did Saeed end up here? How did Kate end up here? Where, why is Aaron here? Why is Sun here? So all the logistics of the flash forwards with the Oceanic Six had to sort of get worked out in the mapping of season 4. So when we came into season 5, particularly as it related to the kind of like the biggest and most important revelation at the end of the 4th season, which is like, how did John Locke's body end up in that coffin? We had already done like a fair amount of pre-planning. And we also knew that we were going to do straight up time travel. Like, it felt like we had been, from the very early days of Lost in season 1, when you find the Adam and Eve skeletons in the cave set, even though that ended up, like the fans were theorizing, oh, that's Jack and Kate, and I was like, oh, they want us to do this, even though that was going to be a payoff not involving the particular time travel per se, but more of the across the sea stuff. I was sort of like, oh, the fans want this sort of Planet of the Apes, sort of like, submerged sort of Statue of Liberty. We should start thinking about that kind of stuff. And so by the time we got into like Ben Linus's origin story and The Purge and Roger Workman, we were like, we're going to do these stories one day. There's going to be a point where the show is like living in Dharma times, and not through the lens of a flashback, but through the lens of the subjective reality of our characters. And as Desmond in season 3, in like Flashes Before Your Eyes, began to sort of establish himself as, I'll just say this now, having done Watchmen, as like a Dr. Manhattan character who sort of like, he didn't have the godlike powers, but he was this sort of free-floating entity who was experiencing past, present, and future all simultaneously. Like that felt like, but between Flashes and The Constant, which was the season 4 episode, it was sort of like, okay, this is fun. Like, it's really hard to do time travel, but like the show can hold it. And like, once we kind of locked in on the idea of like, Josh Holloway in a Dharma jumpsuit, like there was no looking back. It was like, how are we gonna do this, and how are we gonna service it? So I remember season 5 being super fun. Like really enjoying ourselves quite a bit as we were making that season. And like there, particularly for characters like Miles and Hurley, who are just sort of out and out, not absent their own traumas, but like, Ken Leung, and like, I'll just always remember that conversation that they have where Miles is frustratedly trying to explain the rules of time travel to Hurley as like...
But that's the episode, Whatever Happened.
Yes, correct, yeah. As like, oh, like, this is the spirit of the season, which is like, the characters don't, they can start to have the conversations that we're having in the writer's room, and the show is becoming a little bit more meta. And this will be an opportunity to actually start moving into our end game. We're gonna take a step back and away from all of the Jacob and the Man in Black storytelling that we know we're going to be doing in our final season, and we can just lean in hard on time travel and pay off some cool stuff. Pay off. Charlotte was the little girl, and like a lot of those things we had already sort of like figured out we wanted to do. Is just like, what episode are they going to happen in?
Yeah.
One thing to follow up on there, I mean, the tension in season 5 between this whatever happened idea where you're, following the rules of time travel, and then you bring Faraday in, of course, and that's kind of the end game is, can they actually change the past and prevent things? At any point were you tempted to just say, like, to hell with it, like, let's actually have them change the past, or was that never, change the future, or was that never in the cards?
It was never in the cards as a possibility that we were. I mean, obviously we teased that reality in the season 6 in the introduction to the Flash Sideways, when we start with the island on the bottom of the ocean and Oceanic 815 lands in L.A. You're sort of like, oh, is that what they did? Are they now creating the timeline where they were able to negate the series of events that made the plane crash there? But we always adhered strictly to the whatever happened sort of way of doing the storytelling, because you can do Back to the Future Marty McFly storytelling where his parents don't ever meet, but if you're really playing by the rules, Marty literally stops existing in the moment that he pushes George out of the way. Like he stops. There's not like a gradual disappearing from the photo, and he has like a grace period by which he can get his parents back together. And so once we held ourselves to that standard, we were like, oh, it'll be harder but much more fulfilling if everything that they do back in Dharma times already happened. But more importantly, like, Sammy, you're asking the fundamental question that was at the heart of Lost thematically, and as it relates to Locke and Russo as philosophers, not as characters, which is like, how much free will do we really have? And I think that scientifically, as Faraday is presenting, like, we're the variables. Even though I introduced this idea of constants, we have to have control. We have to be able to make these choices. And season 5, we got to play that out not just once or twice, but like over and over and over and over again. The sort of like ethics of, is Saeed shooting young Ben Linus really a bad thing if he'd already done it? And the answer is yes, because he's still choosing to do it. He's still opting to do it, and Kate and Sawyer are choosing to bring Ben to the others and save his life, even knowing what he's going to grow up and become. And so, like, this whole sort of idea of like, am I a puppet, and who has their hand on the strings? That was an essential question to be asking as we move into the final season, where this is at the core of what Jacob and the Man in Black's argument is, which is like, what are people going to do if we leave them to their own devices?
Yeah, and I think you strike a really interesting balance between, the sort of fate versus free will perspective. And I'm glad you mentioned the Faraday scene, because I get goosebumps watching that scene where he gives the speech about humans are Jeremy Davies is amazing, is part of it. But, it's even though I'm not that surprised that you never really considered the possibility that they could change things, I'm glad that what's in your mind is still that, people do have the power to make choices and it matters, because I wouldn't want to watch that scene with him delivering that, that sort of monologue and think, oh, but it's all bullshit. People have no choice anyway.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, and sort of tragic because his mom has no, like, she has no, issues whatsoever. Maybe she has emotional issues, but it's like, Hawking is perfectly fine with saying, I know that I end up murdering my own son, but I actually have to send him back to the island so that he can fulfill his role in that loop, because that's the way that it works. And I think that, we talked about, have you guys ever heard that fable, The Appointment in Samara?
No.
I think like the first time that I heard it was in this Peter Bogdanovich movie, Targets, and if memory serves, Boris Karloff tells the story. But the basic idea is that it takes place in the Middle East, like in modern day or Iraq or Iran or maybe Turkey or something. I don't know. I apologize that I don't know where Samara actually is. But essentially, the idea is that this guy who is in service of a feudal lord is in the marketplace, and he sees death. He sees the Grim Reaper, and he's terrified. And he goes running back to his master and says, I saw death, and he was there for me. I just know it. And his master says, how do you know? How do you know he was there for you? And he goes, he turned and he looked at me. He looked right at me, and he's like, I could tell he was there for me. And then his master says, okay, well, here's what you do. Take a horse, take one of my horses, and ride to Samara, and just lay low in Samara, and then I'll go check out the situation. And once death is no longer around, I'll send for you, and you can come back. It'll be good. Just lay low there, hide there. No one will think to look for you there. So, guy says, thank you, master. He hops on the horse. He rides off, and so now the feudal lord is basically like, I'm kind of curious about the Grim Reaper. I'm going to go see what the situation is. So he goes into town, and he goes into the market, and sure enough, there's Death, the Grim Reaper, still kind of I don't know, sitting having a drink or something like that. And the guy walks up to him and says, hey, what are you doing here? You really scared the bejesus out of my servant. Why did you do that? Why'd you look at him like that? And Death says, I was just so surprised to see him here today because we have an appointment in Samara tomorrow. And so the reason that I love the story is the causation, right? Which is the attempt to avert the inevitable is actually the cause, is what causes it. And to just do appointment in Samara over and over and over and over again, as many different ways as we could, where ultimately the finale is that's the argument that everyone's having, which is and they're having very explicitly, right, Jack and Sawyer, in their final fight, which is what if we end up causing the incident?
I think Miles actually says exactly that at one point. Yeah.
So I think, obviously, having heard this having been in this conversation, that sort of informs some of what we talked about earlier in terms of the logistics of time travel. But I appreciate a lot the idea that Damon and the writers just sort of decided, okay, we're going to do this. There have to be rules, We need to lock into this set of constraints for storytelling purposes, so that we can do this and do it well and sort of allow it to make the points that we want to make and take the characters where we want to take them, using this standard sort of sci-fi device of time travel without allowing it to become, that's what the story's about now. I think he draws a nice line here between the idea of time travel as a storytelling device. It's something we're going to use, but it's not the whole story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I think you're right. If they had allowed them to change the past, or if there weren't rules, that would have been the story.
Yeah,
everything would have been in service of that rather than the time travel being in service of the story. I think you're right about that.
Yeah,
I mean, I would have loved to have seen what would have happened in a season 6 where they legitimately did change the past. I think that would have been fascinating, but it would have been a fundamentally different story.
Yeah.
Than the one they had been telling. By the way, one thing we didn't talk about is, and we discussed this with Francois Chow way back when, another great interview that we had on The Hatch back in season 2 that you should go listen to if you haven't heard it. Just the fact that, we immediately, the first time he starts talking, learn what a jerk he is. Just I don't have all day, people. Just, it comes out of nowhere and is so different than the character we thought we knew from the videos. Anyway, no, the one thing that Damon said that I wanted to just pull out is, his comment about Miss Hawking and how, Eloise, and how she, seemingly doesn't have any issue, playing her role as the time travel enforcer and doing what she has to do, even when that means killing her son. I mean, Damon kind of, says in passing, maybe she had internal turmoil about it. And I just want to say, I think she does have internal turmoil, and I think we see that in the Flash Sideways, finally, where she, wants to keep Desmond away from her son.
Right.
And then when, she finally asks him in the finale, are you going to take Daniel away from me? And he says, no, not yet. And she's so relieved. And I just think we get such a powerful sense then of like, wow, she really did internalize all of this. Like, she's so desperate to have some time with her son that she didn't have in life because, of her own actions. And so I thought that was quite powerful.
We actually will have Fionnuala Flanagan on the show in a couple of weeks. Sammy had the chance to interview her.
Yeah, talked about playing Miss Hawking and what that was like for her. And it's one of several very fun conversations that we're going to have this year. So we'll be back next week with Season 5, Episode 2, The Lie.
We will have another part of our conversation with Damon then, where we will talk about particularly the Sawyer-Juliet relationship and how that evolved.
And in the meantime, follow us on Twitter. We're at The Hatch Podcast. Facebook as well, facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. We would love to hear what you think of the show.
Sammy shared this earlier, but if you want to leave us a hot take, you can call us at 9546-DHARMA. You can also just record a voice memo on your phone and message it to our Twitter account or our Facebook page.
And tell your friends. Tell everyone you know who loves Lost. They should come and give us a listen. We're going to be doing this every week for the next 16 weeks, and we are very, very excited about that.
If you like the show, we always appreciate it if you rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It helps other people find the show.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Ross.
We will talk to you next week.
Namaste.